Hey there, you're listening to Season 2, Episode 7 of We're Just Talking About It, a podcast dedicated to helping non-Muslims learn about Muslim cultures in an effort to increase tolerance through education. Today's episode features a brand new guest. Her name is Mina Sharif. Mina has an interesting story. Born in Afghanistan, she and her family fled to Canada when she was 1 year old. Decades later, Mina moved back to Kabul and struggled to find her way in a world she left behind. Mina has a successful career in communications, which has led her down a wide range of paths. Mina was part of the production team for the 2012 Oscar-nominated short film, Buzkashi Boys. She's worked with different government media departments, and she's also worked on Sesame Street. We hope you enjoy our conversation with Mina.
So, welcome to our show, and we want to just start out with a real quick bio of you. So I'll throw a few questions at you, and then you can answer those quickly, and then we'll roll into we'll go back in time and talk about what you want to talk about and kind of your life and journey, and we'll go from there. But so you're in Toronto right now, right?
Yeah, I'm on visit home, so I'm still based in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and you were born?
I was born in Afghanistan.
Okay.
And was I was less than a year old by the time we had to flee. And
that was 79, 80 time frame, or?
A little bit later, but
okay.
Yeah, it was 82.
Okay.
And my father worked for the RTA, the national television station, as a broadcaster, and it was kind of one of those positions where, looking back, there was some people who may have had the ability to choose whether or not they wanted to stay just on a personal merit. He really didn't, just because both sides wanted him to represent their message on the one TV station that was on the air. Yeah. So we had to go.
That's a scary thing when two armed groups want you to speak their message. You're not going to make one of them happy.
Yeah. So they waited until they couldn't anymore.
And what's your career now? What are you up to these days? And we'll fill in the blanks later.
It kind of, I think, under the umbrella of communication, I've sort of managed to wiggle between private sector, government support, and film production. And I think that's what communication is. It's such a broad term. And so I've been able to walk all those different paths, with Afghanistan and communication being the two key words. So that means ad agency work. That means working with governments on their media plans, internal media plans, social media plans even, but then also working on Sesame Street.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very, I like that.
It's a little
under
broad.
The communications umbrella.
Right. It runs the gamut, yeah.
And one last topical quick question. Have you been to the Oscars?
I have. I was very lucky. I mean, they called me the translator the whole time, but I was fine with that.
You're like, I'm at the Oscars.
Yeah, what was it like?
I tend to be honest about my experience, and it's not to downplay it because I know it was a wonderful experience, but I did fall asleep pretty early on.
Oh my gosh.
Like the rest of America.
Being there in person doesn't help the fact that it goes on too long. It was we'd had some really, really long days, because when we took the two boys from Kabul, the stars of Buzkashi Boys, to the States, it was a very, I would say, like, kind of sexy story for the media. And so they had press from 7 a.m. right up until late at night.
Oh, my goodness. And how old were the boys then?
They were I guess they were 13 then, just about 13, 14. And they had been 11 when we were filming.
Wow, yeah.
11,
so
12.
A whirlwind life, and then long days, and then to the Oscars.
Yeah, and I think that was probably the first chance I got to sit down. So
right, and it's dark in there, and there's that music.
It's really cozy, yeah.
Just lulls you to sleep.
That's awesome. Well, we'll get back to what you're doing now. Let's jump back in time then and start with your journey from Afghanistan to Canada. I mean, what was this like, or how did that all begin? Or if you want to talk about your grandfather, you mentioned his story, which I think is fascinating as well, as somebody who's worked on Afghanistan for years.
Sure. I guess, yeah, when we were talking about, how did I get to Afghanistan and whatever else, there was always a hesitation for me, maybe not a hesitation, but I was never inclined to see myself going back there. Because I never felt that same connection that I thought the rest of the Afghan community in Canada or wherever else had. And that kind of does stem back to how my family was a little bit different, I always felt. A little bit, not necessarily isolated, but just functioned a little differently. And that came back to being a very non-religious family.
Yeah, so tell our audience about that. I mean, why is that different for Afghans?
And I hadn't even been there yet, so I didn't know. I just knew that whenever we would attend more public Afghan functions, that our family I felt was a little bit different. And then it starts back with my grandfather. My paternal grandfather was a religious scholar, and you'll hear of many Afghans who have at least a couple of religious scholars in their family background. And my grandfather was one. He was from Kunar province, a smaller village, but obviously very intelligent, because he made it up kind of the ranks to where they wanted him to teach at a madrasa and then lead a madrasa. And he was well on his way up when the king Zair Shah, one of his appointees, got in contact with him, or he started to work with him, and really kind of nudged him more in the government direction, saying with whatever accomplishment he had, he was encouraged to kind of use it in a more public forum. Yeah. So he made the decision to do that. And I think, I wasn't there, but I think what it did is just kind of expose him to a lot more freedom and a lot more opportunity than he'd had as someone whose key words in life are, village and religion. So he really kind of took it on very intensely and became someone who was upset by how religion was being used, how he felt incorrectly in a public sense. I'll give you the example of Ramadan. When he was the governor, and he was the governor of a couple of provinces, Uruzgan, Ghazni, and back then you would move the entire family from province to province. You wouldn't just sit in Kabul. Wow. And
real quick, because most of our viewers don't know this, so in Afghanistan, as you mentioned, the king reached out to your grandfather. A governor is not elected. A governor is appointed from the federal government.
Yes. He was approached by the cabinet or whoever. I don't know. I just know that he was on that religious path when they had approached him for this. So
multiple governorships.
Yes. And it was throughout this time where, like I said, his religious background was a key part of him being a little bit unhappy with how things were moving forward and how he thought it was all kind of meshing together and people were using things a little bit selectively. And he's gone now, but I've spent time with this grandfather, and he's told me this himself. And he felt that we needed to go back to what the messages originally were before people started tricking the whole population into, strategically doing what one person wanted to see just because he was using the guise of religion. So
he was saying go back to the true message of the Quran?
He was worried that it was getting muddled, let's just say,
Okay.
So an example that he always gave me was during Ramadan, being judgmental of who's fasting and who isn't, and watching your neighbors to make sure that they are, and almost kind of keeping an eye more on everybody else was something he really disapproved of. And he really went back to the roots of also, it's your journey, and two, the elderly, the sick, women on their monthly
Yep.
cycle, children, they're not supposed to fast. Travelers are not. And everyone was really ignoring that. And when I went back to Afghanistan, I saw that this was very, very adamant. It was so fixated on what everybody else thought that a good majority of people, not majority, I'm sorry, but a good number of people I saw were sneaking meals at home, but the focus was on what everybody else was looking at. And so my grandfather back then opened up centers that fed the elderly, the ill, the women, the children, lunchtime as opposed to iftar, to remind communities that.
Yeah, let's go back to the original teachings here.
Yes.
It is very specific that it does not cover everybody, and it should be about your internal journey, not you keeping an eye on everybody else and judging other people. I think that's something that many people go through. Kudos to your grandfather.
Yeah, I think he set the tone then for how his children then were raised, and then in turn, that trickled down to me and my cousins and our generation as well. The point being that we always saw, first of all, a separation between culture and religion, as they'd always given us that message, and also too that if we were going to learn about the religion we were born into, that it was pretty specific, and it didn't just have these broad strokes of rules that we were supposed to follow and that we were supposed to make sure everyone else followed.
Fascinating.
We just had a group come together, and they had asked a question about the separation of culture and religion. Do you think that's common or rare, the separation in Islam?
I think, and this is where I actually think that I can't speak for all of Islam. I only know my own Afghanistan specific experience, and I think that when I look at how my upbringing was compared to what I saw when I got to Afghanistan, it was all one there. When you're Afghan, you were almost, some people would say Muslim first and then Afghan. So it just blew my mind. Whereas where I grew up with the culture and not so much the religion. So I knew the difference because I knew what part was familiar to me and what wasn't. I knew the history. I knew the music. I knew customs, just little traditions, whether it be Pashtun customs or northern customs. I knew what those were, but it was all one big, it was all described under one word in Afghanistan, and it was Muslim often before it was even Afghan.
I think I've noticed that, and I've heard that from a lot of Afghans when they meet Muslims from other countries, and when I've traveled around, you see Afghans are, I won't say pious as much as it's just all tied together, and there's a blur between the religion and the culture, just more than anybody else you run into.
Yeah, I mean, and it really did bother me, and actually, to be honest, it still kind of does, because I feel like it takes from the beauty of both of them when you mash them together so easily, because there's such a beauty to the culture. It's so specific. It's so, it's ancient, and we have different religions in Afghanistan, and this really, how this plays out for them really offends me on their behalf. Sikh Afghans and Hindu Afghans, and we once had Christian and Jew Afghans, and how are they any less Afghan? They're not. But when it's a big blur, they're not in the picture anymore.
I love that. I think that's a great way to say it. You lose the beauty of both when you mesh them together, and you don't realize they're two distinct things.
Yeah, they have their own strengths. They have and you can dedicate yourself to one and the other. But I just feel like when it's all together, it's just a very standard response to everything. Well, we're Muslim, end of story, and that's not the case.
Is there a way to kind of describe the separation? Like, how would you describe separating the religion from the culture? How do you do that?
Well, for me personally, I mean, I look at what was familiar to me when I got there. Feels like it's more on that cultural side, meaning, just certain behaviors. I mean, the hospitality, right, the kind of standard way we speak to our guests, the history of the music and the food and the Pashtunwali, which is the historic tribal systems in the Pashtun areas. I know that because that's my background, but there are more. There's the Uzbek and and Tajik and whatever else as well. So these, for me, are so interesting, and so the history goes back 5,000 years, and to just kind of throw that away and describe us as simply Muslim really upsets me, because that is how it's described now. So the same rule, let's say there's the hospitality rules, they're not even referred to as often as you'd think as a Pashtunwali rule or a Afghan cultural custom. They're now just, that's how Muslims are, but they're missing out.
I think that's a good way of looking at it. And so your grandfather had this view, and then he's raising his children in Afghanistan after he's kind of come to this realization.
Yeah. I mean, and they still grew up, obviously, with a very heavy religious background and understanding, but he really didn't enforce it the way his family had before him. Religion wasn't the focus. They were always encouraged to be very specific, like we were talking about earlier. Know what that rule means. It's not one big, it's not broad strokes. So learn it, but focus on your education. So they ended up really, really fixated on all the boys and all the girls getting education, which I'm not saying others didn't, but he took his focus from religion to a higher education for the kids.
That's another phenomenon. When you see people who pull back from mixing secular and religious things, often their kids will end up more focused on education as children, because they're not just focused solely on everything's tied to a religion. You can have other interests and want to educate yourself in something else. Yeah.
And then I guess just because of the exposure, I mean, this is not to say that religion doesn't condone this, but when you're as isolated and religious as he was growing up, there are certain things that I don't think would have occurred to him to push. And one was when he was the governor of Uruzgan, there was no girls' school, and I had two aunts of school age, and he made them go to the boys' school until a girls' school was built. And I don't know that he. Yeah, they hated him for it, but but I'm not sure he would have done that had he been in the same, sort of mindset that he had been growing up.
That's a great point. Yeah, that probably, that changed just two lives in your family, but that probably changed a lot of people's lives because everybody was watching that too. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. They got short haircuts and everything.
Oh, yeah, they hated it.
Fit right in, yeah, for sure.
Oh, that's funny.
My parents is where it continues to. I've seen a lot of families where one person isn't that religious, and that's not. They still kind of end up generally fitting into the major Afghan circles. My mom's family also. My grandfather was a widower very young and chose not to remarry. And that also kind of nudges you out of the religious circles because people were confused at why he would raise 9 kids.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. He was an army general, and he ended up, he had the support, obviously, the means to have, I guess, help in the house, but he didn't remarry. And I was told that kind of, I'm not saying that they were ostracized, but certainly not as understood in the more religious communities. And he was not religious either. So I think that's why my parents actually clicked because of that similarity in upbringing. And so it was really from both sides of my family. So I feel like I do have a particular lens of we were not religious growing up, so I can see where you're being religious versus where you're being cultural in Afghanistan. And I haven't had a lot of Afghan expat friends who have moved back like I have be able to see it quite as blatantly as I have. because they always had a lot more of that religion in the background than I did. So maybe it got a little hazy for them here and there as well. So I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. I do appreciate that I can see the culture as a separate entity. I really do appreciate that. I like pointing it out. I like pointing out to people that I meet that, that's actually a very traditional Afghan way of doing things. That's not religious.
Yeah,
and they don't know sometimes.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. I'm with you. I think it's kind of healthy for most humans to be able to separate cultures and religions and not assume that your national identity is also a religious identity. Because like you said, there are many people of many religions in every country. That's part of your culture too in a country.
Correct, exactly. And also too, like in the positive, it's good because you can appreciate the positives of the religion and learn about it in its own separate way, and your culture in a separate way. But also when things I want to say kind of become negative, it's really difficult because whether it's Afghan, young Afghans abroad who don't connect with whatever's going on back home, or more importantly, the young people in Afghanistan who, are just kind of rebelling and wanting a whole different environment than we've had in the recent past. And I'm sure you've heard that young people now are kind of breaking a lot of barriers from, mingling with the opposite sex and going to cafes and dressing differently. And I think it's wonderful. But what happens is they sometimes, because everything is so blurred, denounce all of it. Like, nah, I'm not very Afghan. Which also means I'm not very religious. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I've been
so
watching.
They've denounced. Yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna say I've been watching that pretty closely. I noticed, as I went into Afghanistan in 2002, so I saw that culture glimpse then of where things were, and already the young people were really clinging to getting away from cultures they knew, because they were getting away from the Taliban culture, and they wanted they loved this idea of freedom and some of the Western clothing and Western music and all this stuff. I mean, the markets were just full of different and non-Afghan things. So I think there's been a lot of growing going on in the last generation to figure out what's their place, what's real Afghan culture, what do they need to take, what do they keep, what do they reject, what do they move on to. And then social media, that's been a giant spike in letting everybody see everything else in the world.
Yeah, but if it's like we talked about, like a blur, the whole thing, then deciding that you're just not into it is you saying, "Oh, I'm not into the whole thing." So forget the Afghan culture and forget the religion. Whereas if it had been just a little more separated, they may feel differently about one or the other. Or both.
Yeah, that's a great point. Tied so close together, you end up rejecting everything, and instead of taking the good from both things,
you dismiss it all. Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing that in America as well. I teach a lot, high school and college age kids and young folks, and I really feel they're going through the same thing, that they just reject everything that might be tied to religion. Religion has just gotten a bad name over the last decade, and I think more and more people are just rejecting everything.
Yeah, I actually did too. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, when I got there, I was very defensive of the fact that I didn't grow up religious, and that's not part of who I am, because it was so assumed, and I didn't like that. And as time went on, I got to meet so many different people, and when you get to know people on a closer level, you finally get to meet the ones who are so personally dedicated to learning more about the religion and what it's done for them. And I would, attend religious functions and things like that socially. And it started to actually make more sense to me, and I got more curious, and I really appreciated the fact that I needed the eye-opening too. I thought everybody just, used it as an excuse for their rules. And so I was also pre-rejecting it. And when I got there, I got to meet a lot of people whose lives had changed, and people were so comforted by by what religion gave them in some very dire situations. So I've actually come to respect it so much more than when I had initially got there.
I think what I feel like you're seeing now, and maybe somewhat of what you experienced, is wanting to have the choice to choose how this religion impacts you and how much you let it in, rather than having it forced upon you. And when something
absolutely, 100%
forced on you, you're made to go, you have to sit there, you just don't enjoy it. You resent it the entire time. And so if you were allowed to approach the religion like, how can I, accept this? What makes sense to me? How can I implement this in my life? You embrace it. You accept it. You get to choose how it fits into your identity rather than being your identity.
I couldn't have said it better. That's exactly it. It's why I want, the word separation is not to say that that either one is bad. It's exactly that. It's for you to decide what you want to learn more about. It's for you to decide where you feel more strongly. And when we talk about, when people ask me, not so much anymore, but about burqas and how I feel about women wearing them, I really don't care if somebody wants to wear it. I just want them to have the choice not to. And so the choice thing is extremely important to me across the board, from women working to wearing burqas to religion to anything that I've seen in Afghanistan that has really sort of offended me greatly is when that choice is taken away.
That is where we will leave you today. Hopefully we gave you something to think about as far as whether culture and religion can be separated in Muslim cultures. Please join us for our next episode as we continue our conversation with Mina. As always, you can find us at We're Just Talking About It on Instagram and Facebook, and you can email us at WJTANC@gmail.com.